Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International. On tonight's headlines. Ukraine's president made an impassioned plea for global street protests against Russia's bloody month-old invasion and for democratic leaders amassed in Brussels for emergency summits on Thursday to send more advanced weaponry. And Japan said a suspected North Korean intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM, fired today, this afternoon, landed within Japan's exclusive economic zone west of the country's north coast. And COVID-19 is making its latest comeback in parts of the northeastern United States as the BA.2 coronavirus variant becomes dominant in the country. And the IMF expects that global growth will slow in 2022 but remain positive despite lingering effects of the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. First in our news, Ukraine's president made an impassioned plea for global street protests against Russia's bloody month-old invasion and for democratic leaders amassed in Brussels for emergency summits on Thursday to send more advanced weaponry. In a late-night television address from the emptied streets of the besieged capital Kiev, a defiant but visibly tired Volodymyr Zelensky appealed in English for the world to help ensure his nation's survival. Take a look.
Show your standing. Come from your offices, your homes, your schools and universities. Come in the name of peace. Come with Ukrainian symbols to support Ukraine, to support freedom, to support life. Come to your squares, your streets. Make yourselves visible and heard. Say that people matter, freedom matters, peace matters, Ukraine matters. Russia started the war against freedom as it is. This is only the beginning for Russia on the Ukrainian land. Russia is trying to defeat the freedom of all people in Europe, of all the people in the world. It tries to show that only crude and cruel force matters.
Now, his appeal came exactly 1 month after Russian tanks rolled over the border, bringing a conflict that has already killed thousands of civilians and thousands more soldiers on both sides. More than 10 million Ukrainians have fled their homes as cities have faced sustained Russian bombardment from land, sea, and air. In the southern port city of Mariupol alone, 100,000 people are trapped without food, water, or power and enduring fierce shelling by Russian forces. In the city's hospital, a local official said staff have evacuated patients to the basement where they are treated by candlelight beside 600 to 700 other residents seeking what little safety they can. And experts say Russia's once vaunted military has been bogged down by dogged resistance and has turned to long-range bombardment in the hope of breaking Ukrainian resolve. An air raid siren blares and tears fill Vasily Kravchuk's eyes as he surveys the wreckage of the school his 6-year-old son was meant to start at next year. The 37-year-old lives and works in Zhytomyr, a garrison town west of Kiev. Take a listen.
It's hard. It's very hard to almost months live in that situation. One crazy month. You hear the feeling. It's every day for 20, 30 times. We go to the basement. It's difficult because my wife is pregnant. I have a little son.
Now, his son had been looking forward to starting at the school, but now it is a pile of concrete. The city has suffered a series of devastating Russian strikes since the start of the war. The regional maternity hospital was badly damaged by a blast on March 2, while school number 25 was destroyed on March 4. Zhytomyr has been spared the devastation of Ukrainian cities like Mariupol in the south, but it remains in Russia's sights as its troops attempt to encircle Kiev from the west. And NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg today accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of making a big mistake by invading Ukraine, as leaders are now gathering to discuss overhauling the alliance's eastern defenses. Take a look.
Putin has made a big mistake, and that is to launch a war, to wage war against an independent sovereign nation. He has underestimated the strength of the Ukrainian people, the bravery of the Ukrainian people and the armed forces. We have increased our military presence in the eastern part of the alliance. The NATO leaders will today address the need for a reset of our deterrence and defense in the longer term.
Now, NATO leaders are vowing to bolster weapons deliveries to non-member Ukraine and supply protection against chemical and nuclear threats from Russia. But the alliance has rebuffed pleas from Kiev to impose a no-fly zone to help halt Russia's onslaught for fear of getting dragged into a full-fledged conflict with Moscow. NATO allies are also to put pressure on China to drop what they see as its political backing for Russia, amid fears that Beijing could start supplying military hardware to Moscow. And Beijing accused the NATO chief of spreading disinformation with claims that China has backed Russia's war against Ukraine, amid growing international pressure to distance itself from Moscow. China has refused to condemn close ally Russia over the bloody invasion of Ukraine and lagged behind many other countries in providing humanitarian aid to the war-stricken country. Take a look.
指责中方散布涉乌克兰的虚假信息，本身就是在散布虚假信息。中方始终本着客观公正的态度，为早日实现停火止战、避免人道主义危机、恢复和平稳定做出积极努力。我们一贯主张，乌克兰应当成为东西方沟通的桥梁，而不应成为大国博弈的前沿。
Now, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg accused China of giving political backing to Russia as it invades Ukraine by spreading blatant lies and warned Beijing against providing material support to Moscow's war effort. And more than half of all children in Ukraine have been displaced from their homes since Russia launched its full invasion on February 24, that according to the United Nations today. 1 month of war in Ukraine has led to the displacement of 4.3 million children. That is more than half of the country's estimated 7.5 million child population, according to the UN's children's agency, UNICEF. Now, displaced children make up nearly half of the over 10 million people who have been forced to flee their homes since the invasion began. More than 1.8 million children have fled Ukraine as refugees, while another 2.5 million are now displaced inside their war-ravaged country. UNICEF Chief Catherine Russell said the war has caused one of the fastest large-scale displacements of children since World War II. The UN Human Rights Office has confirmed that 81 children have been killed in the conflict and 108 injured, but acknowledges that the true toll is likely far higher. And Prime Minister Boris Johnson said Britain will now send 6,000 missiles and 25 million pounds, or 33 million US dollars, or 30 million euros, in financial aid to Ukraine's army to help it fight Russian forces. The announcement of the funding and additional military hardware, consisting of anti-tank and high-explosive weapons, comes on the eve of NATO and G7 summits set to discuss the Russian invasion. London has already provided Kiev with over 4,000 anti-tank weapons, including next-generation light anti-tank weapon systems, or NLAWs, and so-called Javelin missiles. The UK government is also supplying Starstreak high-velocity anti-aircraft missiles to help counter aerial bombings, as well as body armor, helmets, and combat boots. And Norway is organizing exercise Cold Response, which is designed to get allied troops used to fighting together in extreme cold. And Sweden and Finland have sent a strong detachment for these maneuvers, which are currently being held on the Norwegian soil. 1,600 Swedish soldiers and 680 Finns. Take a look.
Sweden has participated in Cold Response for several times, and also to participate in exercise, manifest your interoperability level and your training and the possibility to cooperate with others. And this is even more important when it comes to this year because of the Ukraine and the situation in our part of the world. Well, with the family you take care of each other. You are not always agreeing, but you have a bond.
And this is the core family. But of course, there are distant family members in any family, and we welcome all the, the European friends and even transatlantic cooperation in this regard.
While the partnership is not new, the war in Ukraine, triggered by Russia, is pushing Finland and Sweden, two militarily non-aligned nations, even closer to the Atlantic alliance. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has shifted public opinion in the two Nordic nations. For the first time, a majority of Swedes and Finns have come out in favor of joining NATO, according to opinion polls published since late February. Military officers from the two nations refuse to comment publicly on the politically sensitive matter, but insist that if and when the time comes for NATO membership, they will be ready. Stockholm and Helsinki have both ruled out joining for now, although the issue has been the subject of extensive political discussions in Finland. If the Nordic countries were to join NATO, it would have serious military and political repercussions, that according to Russia's foreign ministry, warning it late February. And as NATO leaders look for solutions in Brussels, they might find inspiration in a groundbreaking woman who devoted much of her life to preserving world peace. Madeleine Albright, the first woman to be Secretary of State, died of cancer at 84. Take a look.
For all the turmoil this young century has brought, America remains by far the world's mightiest economic and military power, with a resurgent economy and an energy revolution giving us newfound confidence in our future. The war in Kosovo was a confrontation between barbaric killing and necessary force, between vicious intolerance and respect for human rights, between tyranny and democracy. We prevailed because our alliance was unified and strong. Most important, we succeeded because our cause was right and because of the people of Kosovo.
Tapped by President Bill Clinton as ambassador to the UN, then as the U.S. top diplomat, Albright was one of the most influential stateswomen of her generation. Her memoirs, Madame Secretary, were published in 2003. She also wrote a book about her huge collection of brooches, which she explained to Smithsonian Magazine in 2010, sometimes were reflective of whatever issue we are dealing with, unquote. Once during her stint at the United Nations, state media in Saddam Hussein's Iraq compared her to an unparalleled serpent, and she responded by wearing a snake pin to a meeting on Iraq.
When she was Secretary of...
And Japan said a suspected North Korean intercontinental ballistic missile fired on Thursday afternoon landed within Japan's exclusive economic zone west of the country's north coast. Take a look.
北朝鮮は本日24日14時33分ごろ、北朝鮮西岸付近から1発の弾道ミサイルを東方向に向けて発射しました。現時点における分析では、発射された弾道ミサイルは約71分飛翔し、15時44分ごろ、北海道の渡島半島の西方約150キロの日本海、我が国の排他的経済水域内に落下したものと推定されます。 飛翔距離は約1100キロ、また最高高度は6000キロメートルを超えると推定されます。今般の発射は我が国の安全保障に対する深刻な脅威であります。また何らの事前の通報もなく我が国 EEZ 内に着弾させたことは航空機や船舶の安全確保の観点からも極めて問題のある危険な行為であり、強く非難をいたします。
Now, nuclear-armed North Korea has long coveted an ICBM that can carry multiple warheads, and the U.S. and South Korea say has been testing the Hwasong-17, a giant ICBM first unveiled in October 2020. Analysts say that North Korea uses ostensibly peaceful satellite development as a fig leaf for full-range ICBM development, as there is significant overlap in technology. The U.S. and South Korea had this month warned that Pyongyang was preparing to test fire an ICBM at full range after what they called a spate of tests disguised as space launches. Meanwhile, here's a reaction from Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida condemning North Korea's launch of a suspected intercontinental ballistic missile. Let's listen in.
先ほど北朝鮮が新型 ICBM と思われる弾道ミサイルを発射し、我が国の領海に近い EEZ 内に落下をいたしました。許されない暴挙であり、断固として非難をいたします。北朝鮮は本年に入ってから新型 ICBM を含め高い頻度で弾道ミサイルの発射を繰り返しています。一連の北朝鮮の行動は我が国、そして地域および国際社会の平和と安全を脅かすものであり、断じて容認することはできません。今回の弾道ミサイルの発射も関連する安保理決議に違反するものであり、強く非難をいたします。
South Korea's ex-president Park Geun-hye left hospital today, 3 months after she was released from prison following a pardon for her role in one of the country's biggest corruption cases. Since the December pardon, the 70-year-old Park has been an inpatient at the Samsung Medical Center in Seoul, being treated for shoulder pain and dental problems, as well as stress. Take a look.
많이 회복됐습니다. 국민 여러분께 5년 만에 인사를 드리게 됐습니다. 많이 염려를 해주셔서 건강이 많이 회복이 됐고요. 지난 4개월 동안 헌신적으로 치료에 임해주신 삼성병원의 의료진 그리고 관계자 여러분께 감사의 말씀을 드리고 싶습니다.
Now, she became South Korea's first woman president in 2013, casting herself in the role of the daughter of the nation, incorruptible and beholden to none. Less than 4 years later, she was impeached and ousted. Park and her close friend Choi Sol-sil were accused of taking bribes from conglomerates, including Samsung, in exchange for preferential treatment. The case sparked huge street protests. Moon pardoned Park in December, citing her poor health and a need to promote national unity as factors in his decision. We'll be back with more news after this.
The renewable energy resource of the Philippines.
Si Mig Subiri ang nag-akda ng Renewable Energy Act na nagpasok ng 1 trilyong pisong pondo na nagbigay ng trabaho sa halos 3 milyong Pilipino, nagdala ng liwanag sa milyong-milyong tahanan at nagpaunlad sa libu-libong komunidad sa Pilipinas.
Pangako sa inyo mga kababayan, sa tulong ninyo, itutuloy natin ang pagsulong ng mga batas tulad nito.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Parating na pag-asa, sabay nating matatanaw. Uklod, Philippines. Number 78 sa balota. Bata matanda kahit saan man nagmula sa biyahe ng pag-unlad natin ay makakasama ka. Uklod, Filipino. Number 78 sa balota.
Welcome back. Within the next 5 years, everyone on Earth should be protected by early warning systems against increasingly extreme weather and climate change, according to an ambitious new UN target announced today. Here's UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
Human-caused climate disruption is now damaging every region. The most recent report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change details the suffering already happening. Half of humanity is already in the danger zone. Each increment of global heating will further increase the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events. That is why we must limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. Keeping 1.5 alive requires a 45% reduction in global emissions by 2030 to reach carbon neutrality by mid-century. But, according to current national commitments, global emissions are set to rise by almost 14% this decade. The world must end its addiction to fossil fuels, especially coal. At the same time, we must invest equally in adaptation and resilience. That includes the information that allows us to anticipate storms, heat waves, floods, and droughts. Today, 1/3 of the world's people, mainly in least developed countries and small island developing states, are still not covered by early warning systems. In Africa, it's even worse. 60% of people lack coverage. This is unacceptable, particularly with climate impacts sure to get even worse. Early warnings and action save lives. To that end, today I announced the United Nations will spearhead new action to ensure every person on Earth is protected by early warning systems within 5 years. And I've asked the World Meteorological Organization to lead this effort and to present an action plan at the next UN Climate Conference later this year in Egypt. We must boost the power of prediction for everyone and build their capacity to act.
And the IMF expects that global growth will slow down this year but remain positive despite lingering effects of the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. Take a look.
We are likely to see shrinkage that could be a third of what it was before the war. Imagine how that translates into hardship on people. So what we did was to immediately respond to a request from Ukraine for emergency financing, $1.4 billion. It is to keep the country functioning. It is to make sure that there is support for the most vulnerable people, that there is administration securing what I just talked about, water and electricity, even in the war-affected areas. We are also very closely engaged with Ukraine on how to apply best crisis management measures so the economy does not collapse.
Meanwhile, COVID is making its latest comeback in parts of the northeastern U.S. as the BA.2 coronavirus variant becomes dominant in that country. The country is currently registering an average of 28,600 cases per day, down well below the last peak of more than 800,000 average daily infections seen in January. COVID deaths are running at 900 per day, with a total of 1 million deaths from the disease expected within about a month. But Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Director Rochelle Walensky told reporters there were early signs of a new wave. Take a look.
We need Congress to act and provide $22.5 billion in immediate emergency funding so we can execute on the plan, so we can be prepared for whatever comes next. Not having enough vaccines is completely unacceptable, as vaccines have proven to be our single most important tool in protecting Americans. We should be securing additional supply right now. Many other countries are already doing so. In fact, Japan, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Hong Kong have already secured future booster doses.
CDC has been closely tracking the BA.2 sublineage of the Omicron variant carefully. The variant has been in the United States for about the past 2 months, and it has been slowly increasing in proportion compared to BA.1. This week, we estimate that BA.2 represents about 35% of circulating variants nationally. As we're learning from our colleagues in Europe, Asia, and South Africa, where BA.2 has resulted in varied peaks of cases, there's no evidence that BA.2 variant results in more severe disease, nor does it appear to be more likely to evade our immune protection. However, it does have increased transmission in comparison to the related BA.1 Omicron variant that circulated in the US this past winter. Over the past week, we have seen a small increase in reported COVID-19 cases in New York State and New York City, and some increases in people in the hospital with COVID-19 in New England, specifically where the BA.2 variant has been reaching levels above 50%. This small
And finally, in our news, the developer of the AstraZeneca vaccine, Sarah Gilberts, has many science accolades to her name, but now she shares an honor with Beyonce and Marilyn Monroe, and that is a Barbie doll in her likeness. Take a look.
It's a very strange concept to have a Barbie doll created in my likeness. I hope it will be part of making it more normal for girls to think about careers in science, although to be honest, when I was a young girl, I never believed that I wouldn't have a career in science. Well, I hope that my Barbie doll, as well as others of women who work in science and medicine, will just keep reminding them that there are many careers open to them. So when they're playing, they're also thinking about what they might like to do in the future. I've been designing vaccines for a while now. I make vaccines against diseases that don't often infect people, but can sometimes cause outbreaks, and we need to be ready to protect people when that happens. So this is just another stage in doing the same kind of work, and I'm very proud of the work that the team has done to get this done so quickly. I think it's important to show girls and young women what options there are available to them, because if you don't know what there is out there, then it's not a career that you're going to take up. It is important to encourage women to take up careers in STEM subjects. Actually, in biological sciences, many women do go to university and study that area, and it's only at the very higher levels of the profession that we tend to have a dominance of males, and that's something that I want to see changing in the next few years.
And as always, I'll end the day on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay alert, stay informed, because we live in interesting times. Good night.